Good morning, Raga here. It is the end of March, I think March 27th to 28th. It is cold. We had a wonderful couple days of like plus 14 temperatures, and Celsius, by the way. And now we're back to sub-freezing. It is cold. It's like 0 degrees. Hence why I got a little heater going on. Anyway, today we are going to be digging into my father's Rhino. This is a 2008 Rhino 700 EFI, electronic fuel injection, which runs the Yamaha 686 single-cylinder engine in it. That's oriented, it's actually backwards if you haven't seen inside of a Rhino before. Central engine, backwards. What he's experiencing right now is I'm going to say a common problem after X amount of kilometers. Depends on how you use it. Dad does use this for a fair amount of work around his property, so hence the clutch takes a little bit more abuse. The issues he's experiencing is called freewheel. So the way that these Yamaha Ultramatic transmissions work, there's two clutches. There's a internal wet clutch, and then there's a primary clutch. If you're experiencing freewheel, 90% of the time it is not going to be within your primary clutch. It's going to be in your wet clutch because they have what's called a one-way sprag bearing. It's basically a bearing that goes inside of a drum that powers the primary clutch, but on the inside of the engine. So what it does is it consistently keeps pressure on the primary clutch to constantly move that belt. And that's why Ultramatic's CVT transmissions last so long, is because there's always pressure on that belt and it's not wearing the belt down just sitting there idling, or especially at low speeds. It almost works like a semi-automatic clutch, like what you find in the old Honda ATVs or some of the older Honda mini bikes that have an automatic 3 or 4 speed or 5 speed transmission where there's no clutch, but you still shift gears. So, what you're experiencing when you freewheel. Typically, in a CVT transmission on a Yamaha, when you let go of the throttle, that engine is going to try to hold you back. So it holds, that one-way clutch bearing holds everything together. So it holds the belt tight to the pulleys tight to the engine, and then the primary clutch tight to the engine. So it's not going to run away on you going down the hill. A freewheel means you take your foot off the fuel, and you don't touch the brake, but the speed of the machine going down the hill will pick up. Sometimes you'll hear some clunking, sometimes you'll hear some grinding, that kind of thing. Most likely it's going to be a result of you have a worn out sprag bearing or worn out one-way bearing. So to access that, as you can see, I've already taken some components apart. The two seats need to come out first. First of all, the seats, if you never had a Rhino, this is your first time dealing with this kind of issue, the little latch in the front, lift up, and then pull up, and then out, and both sides, the seats are set up that way. This center console here, easiest way to get that out is going to be to put your emergency brake on, put your gear selector in low, all the way forward, because what's that going to do is when you lift up the back side of the console, slide out, and then up, and then it's just going to lift up and away from those components, because they rest inside of their own little cubby hole here. So once we get to that point, remember, it's a good idea to just try to look and see if there's any debris, any mud. Obviously, there's going to be some mud because you've been using the bike. But the best thing we're going to do right now is just clean up around here best we can, and get some compressed air in there, just blow it on around and make sure there's not going to be any contamination when we start to take everything apart here. So I'm going to do that now, and I'll see you guys in a second. Okay, so now that that is done, did our due diligence here, just trying to clean up this a little bit. Feel free to wash this. Like this ATV was washed, or the side-by-side was washed before it came to me. But, I'm going to clean up this a little bit as we go. So the next step after we do a little bit of cleaning here, make sure nothing's going to fall in or around where we got to work. We got to take off our coil first, because that's going to be the first thing in the way that we got to get access to this CVT belt box. So this is the coil for your ignition. So this is going to come off just with two 10mm bolts. You're going to see two. You don't necessarily have to undo this, but I'm going to get it right out of the way. You're going to see two power and a ground wire. One's going to be a red with a brown stripe. The other one's going to be orange with a gold ring. I'm just going to mark on here orange, just with a little soapstone, and get that out of the way so that I unplug those. So just get that right out of the way so it's tucked away nice and neat somehow. There, that'll work. That's fine. And you're just going to pop your coil off your spark plug, or excuse me, pop your spark wire off your spark plug, and we're going to remove this. So I'll get that off, and we'll see you in a sec. Okay, next procedure. After that coil's out of the way, we're going to have to take off this intake tube. This is for your CVT belt. I believe this is your intake, and your exhaust is going to be up top here. So to get access to here, what we have to do is we have to remove two 10mm bolts again, and there's going to be a couple tube clamps here that are just a Phillips screwdriver. If they've never been off before, more than likely they're probably going to be a little bit rusty. I'm going to suggest spraying a little bit of lubricant on here, like a penetrant lubricant, just to make sure that when you start turning these, you're not going to strip these soft screws. I don't know why they make them so soft, but it happens all the time. So we're going to take that tube off, and at 2 points, here and in here, and again your two 10mm bolts, and then we can get access to our box here, because we got to get all of these bolts all the way around this belt box completely off. Another thing we got to do is just kind of get this throttle cable out of the way. Excuse me, not throttle cable. This is for your emergency brake. Just push, because that's going to have to come off with that belt cover. Okay, so now that we got our intake tube off from the clutch cover here, again, 10mm bolts. Thank you, Japan. 1, 2, 3, 4, and a whole bunch more around this box. Alright, so I've got the belt cover off, or halfway off. I'm having a little bit of difficulty trying to clear this pipe right here, just because of this flange. It just seems to be right in the way. So what I'm going to do is I already have taken out the pop rivets, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and just pull that away from that frame. We're just going to set that aside. And just to make it a little bit easier, you can see where it's kind of getting stuck here. I think what I'm going to do is just temporarily unbolt this to get that out of there. Probably end up loosening these two bolts down here. These are, I believe, 8mm. I don't think they're 10s. No, they're 8mm on the floor, so that I can get this console just pulled forward just a little bit so I can clear this pipe to get this belt casing out of here. So that's what I'm going to do, and I'll see you guys in a second. Okay, so again, what I've done, removed the two 8mm bolts here. I flipped this center console just off of the hook that holds it on this rail, removed the bolt for the rail, and I figured while I'm at this point, it's actually a little bit easier for me to work with if I actually take this plate off. So that's just 4 12mm bolts, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that comes off like that. Then we have the seat rail here. It's going to make my life a lot more easier again if I just get rid of this all together. That way I have a free area to work with. 1, 2, 3, 4, 12mm bolts again. That comes out. We'll just put everything in the bed. Now we can take the clutch cover right off, nice and easy. So here's your clutches. This is your primary, this is your secondary. The secondary does have this little induction fan here. That's to help pull air from your intake, swirl it around inside of the air box for cooling, and then on your outtake or on your exhaust, which just comes out on the top side, helps blow that out too. Keeps a positive pressure in the belt casing. So to get access to the primary clutch, we got to take this cage off. This cage does have a pilot bearing inside of here. Just be cautious of that. There might be a little bit of tension on this aluminum casting housing. There's 4 10mm bolts to remove this. 4 or 5. 1, 2, there's 4. So you'll see 1 down in here, 1, 2, and again, you're going to have to do a little bit of blind work down here, 3, and then 4. And once that's off, that clutch cover is just going to pull straight out. Remember, there is a bearing inside of here, so be cautious of that. While you have your clutch cover off, good idea to just take a look at the condition of the clutch cover, clean it up if necessary. I'm going to give this a little blast out with air. You can see inside of the lip here, make sure there's no damage that goes alongside in here. That's actually what keeps water outside of your seal, or inside of your seal. I think I said that right. No, I didn't. That's what keeps water outside of your belt box. There's a lip seal right here. And there's a soft seal inside of that front cover. So we're not going to be delving into the secondary clutch for any reason unless we're doing additional maintenance to it. So we're not going to do that. I'm going to get this primary clutch cage off, and I'll show you guys what's the procedure to take that clutch off. All right, so now that we have our clutch cage off, I will show you the back side of the clutch cage here. Take note that there are different size bolts that fit through here. There are 2 guide pins, one on the top. Focus. No, don't change color. What the hell are you doing, phone? There. 1 guide pin here, 1 guide pin on the bottom, and the longer bolts go on the guide pins. And on the bottom side, that is where your pilot bearing is. Rests right there, where that lens flare was. Aesthetic. Okay. So, up to you how you want to take that primary clutch off. This is a 7/8, I believe. It probably is metric, but because everything else on the bike's metric, but I cannot remember. But a 7/8 socket fits nice and snug on there and doesn't rock back and forth. So I'm going to use my air impact. It is up to you to do that. You don't have to do that. It's probably not recommended. For simple reasons of you're dealing with some more delicate components inside of this clutching system, and it is a higher risk, but do at your own risk. So I'm going to knock this off here and pull this primary right off. As soon as that nut comes loose, this is going to want to come right off with it, and then you can just slip your belt right off. Okay, so now that we got the primary off and the belt off, we will be covering servicing that primary clutch. I don't know if I'll include that in this video, but I will do it. But anyway, it's a good idea to do that while you have everything apart. Your secondary clutch does not need to be removed with this. I did my wet clutch on my Rhino on my older Grizzly 660, and the belt casing did have to come off, which means the secondary clutch has to come off. But in this case, you don't. Secondary clutch again is going into your transmission, your drive line. Your primary is your driven. Your primary is your drive. Your secondary is your driven. So just give your primary or your secondary a little tug. Make sure that you're not feeling any bearing play or anything like that. That might be cause of concern that would cause you to take this off, if that's the case. But if not, we're just going to blow this out with compressed air in a minute here, and we'll go from there. But now that you have your primary off, your back sheave, your secondary sheave, just going to slide right off of your shaft. So I'm just going to set that here and inspect the sheaves too. Make sure there's no deep grooving or anything like that. I can feel a little bit right here, but that's mostly due to work. You can tell where the belt sits when the belt rides. So now you have access to your wet clutch casing. So this is your wet clutch casing right in here. This shaft comes out with your wet clutch casing because it's in here with a circlip and a bearing. So if you ever get oil inside of your belt casing, more than likely this seal has gone, or the case seal. More than likely it's going to be this seal, because this seal is a rotating seal. The seal it does not. It's just a case seal. So what we're going to do is I'm going to clean this up real good. This is the very important part. Clean this up really, 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 really good. Compressed air, brake clean. Make sure there's going to be no contaminants that are going to get in here. But before we remove this casing, remember it is a wet clutch, which means it's encased in oil. So we are going to have to drain the oil. Now is a good time to do an oil change. So I'm going to clean this up really well, compressed air, get some brake clean in there, and in the process, I'm going to drain the engine oil as well. And before we do any type of work, I should have said this to begin with. Make sure your key's out of the machine, somewhere safe, and realistically, you should disconnect the battery if you're working on any type of machine for safety. That's my fault. I should have said that from the get-go. But remember, safety first when you're digging into these pieces of equipment, this type of equipment, or any equipment for that matter. And yeah, so before I keep rambling, let's get this done, and we'll see you guys in the next clip. Okay, it's probably been, well, about a week and a half, 2 weeks since the last clip. Parts were on back order, like many things in this world right now. And I apologize for the little bit of a flicker that you're seeing. This light is an LED, and they do that on camera. Just bear with it. So now that we're going to be digging into the wet clutch area here, we want to make sure this is really clean, because once this covers off, you're going to be into the engine. And you obviously don't want any foreign debris to get in there while you're working. So we got some brake clean. We're just going to pump it up here and soak her down, make sure we get up and around that seal. Just like that. And we're going to get a little bit of air. Watch your eyeballs. Okay, that's, yeah, again, do your best to eliminate any chances of any foreign debris getting in there. And by the way, buying brake clean and putting it into a chemical sprayer, like a big bottle of brake clean like that, way cheaper per liter or per gallon, depending on if you're in the US or Canada, to go that route. So now what we're going to do, we're going to remove all of our 8mm bolts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And once these bolts come off, this cover, including this spline, is going to come off with it. So you're seeing a little bit of oil come out of here. Hopefully you did remember to drain the oil out of this machine. However, that means the gasket is broken, and that's a good sign, because that means it's close to come off. This sucker was on there. I had a tap around all points where it was bolted in with, wherever I put it, my brass punch. Don't use metal. Use something nice and soft like brass. And I kept doing it in a crisscross pattern. And eventually I could hear the paper gasket behind here starting to let go. So one swift pull and everything flies apart. Well, that wasn't the intention. That was not the intention. Okay, anyway, what you see here is your one-way bearing. This is what needs to be replaced. Let's see if I can focus in on here. Focus. Focus. Okay. So your one-way bearing, you will notice, has a dot. That is an orientation dot. I will explain that later. That means it goes one way inside of your engine. And you have to remember, with the Rhino, the engine is backwards. So when it says orientate towards the front of the engine, especially when it comes to the drive belt, that is the front of the engine. That is the front of the machine. It's either going to specify front of the machine, front of engine. On the belts, typically it's going to have an arrow showing the direction of spin, which is the front of the engine. Front engine and the Rhino being backwards. So, after you've removed that one-way bearing, which, by the way, just sits right in here, like so, on the back side, underneath the cover, this cavity in the center is where the one-way bearing sits. Outside here is actually your drive clutch, your main drive clutch. This is part of what's known, or this is what's known as your wet clutch. So at this point, it is a good idea to do a wet clutch inspection. Basically, what you're going to look for, I don't know, my light dyed here. What you're going to look for is excess wear. Now, there is some measurements that you can take from the bottom where this ring is here up to the top of where the wear pads are. I know there's a friction pad name, something like that. Anyway, there is a measurement that can be taken there. I've seen them right down to the metal. Obviously, if they get that far, you're in trouble. You need to replace your wet clutch. This clutch actually is in pretty good shape. I'm going to inspect it a little bit further. I'm not going to remove the clutch. This clutch can be removed, your wet clutch, with this nut. I'm not 100% sure if you need the special tool. Pretty sure you do, because there's no way to hold on to that clutch safely without damaging anything. Maybe you have some ideas, and if you do, please do it. Please share it below in the comment section. So now what we're going to do is we're going to clean this up for some brake clean. I'm going to remove the residual gasket that was holding everything here together. Again, your choice and tool to remove that. I'm going to use a razor blade. Make sure you do not gouge any of the cast aluminum, because it is soft. It does not want to focus there. It is soft. So I'm going to get that gasket cleaned up on both sides so that we have a nice clean mating surface. And I'm going to go grab the new part, which is going to be the new one-way bearing. And then I will show the install. If you're unfamiliar with how one-way bearing works, inside of here, I don't know if I can push up to show you, these are lobed. These bearing pieces are lobed, which means they will go one way, but as soon as you have pressure on the other way, they bind up, which means they drive your clutch or they freewheel. Drive the clutch, freewheel. So that's basically how that one-way bearing works, and it does. It's not. These are not rollers, by the way. These are not rollers inside of here. These are just basically cams or lobes. So they are lubricated with your engine oil. So after everything's all cleaned up, I did just a wiggle test on this, laid it flat on a flat surface, and don't know if you can pick this up. That is excess play in this bearing. So, which means we are now going to have to replace this bearing. So, yeah. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to grab my seal removal tool, and we're going to pop the seal out. Don't reuse the seal. Get the numbers off it. In fact, I'm going to do this right now for reference. Yeah, H&S seal. That's the numbers I need right there. Perfect. All right. There's your part number for the seal. So I'm going to get the seal puller, take the seal off, and you're going to see a circlip inside of here. So after that seal's removed, there's your carrier bearing, or your bearing for here. And she's pretty wobbly. So here's your circlip. That is part of the seal. Never mind about that. So let's get my snap ring pliers, get that out of there. All right, so after that, snap ring is out of there. This is actually just going to lift right up. So actually I'm going to bring this over to the edge here and grab my soft hammer and a quick little tap. So come out. And there's your bearing. That's what we're going to be replacing. And there's your primary clutch drive right there. Alright, so I'm going to take my snap ring pliers again, get this out of here, and that bearing's just going to push out from the front this way. So at this point I got the bearing out, got the casing cover cleaned up, nice and clean inside. Check the bearing race, looks good. Interesting fact, this sucker got hot. That discoloration there typically means that that wet clutch was spinning inside of here. So I am going to measure out the wear on that wet clutch. Right now, I do have everything covered up. Just till I get some more parts. Here's the bearing out of this clutch cover case too. So it's hard to feel the bearing, but when everything's assembled, there is play in there. Alright, so this video is picking up probably 2.5 weeks later. I ran into some issues. I had some parts on back order. They had the bearing in stock, but this is what I need. These are little keepers, and they go actually in, they rest in these guide holes for the casing, but they also go in 1 and 2 little slots on the side of the engine casing. The issue was one of these, specifically this one, was absolutely pitted, marred, seized so bad on the engine side that I had to dig it out. I had to pick it out little by little, cut it with razor blades. I had to dig my little screwdrivers in there to try to bend it and pry it out, and then I ended up having to take a drill on the engine side and then try to spin it in there so I can pull it out. What a mess. Anyway, so before these keepers go back in, they're getting a slight coat of silver grade anti-seize. So, now that we have the parts back in stock, again, this is your wet clutch cover. So what we're going to do, we have the new bearing, and that definitely doesn't have any play. I don't have any assembly lube, but I do have a little bit of air tool oil, which I've done in the past, just to give it a little bit of lubricity for the first startup. You don't want to run anything dry, for sure. So I'll just give that a quick little spin. And get a little bit on there as well. Just to help it seat and slide into place. Alright. So, there's no front or back to this bearing, so that's just going to rest right into here. And I need my bearing install tool, which I have here, and I might need a bigger one because that's only going to cover the inner race, and you want to cover the outer race on that bearing, simply for the fact that you don't want to put pressure on one side of the bearing and not the other. Okay, so the primary clutch shaft is on. The friction drum for the wet clutch is in, which is a one-piece assembly. If you have skipped part of the video, I don't know. Some people do, and then they ask questions later. So the inner snap ring is on. The outer snap ring is on to hold the shaft in, and then the new oil seal is in. So that is all complete, so I don't feel any wobble in that whatsoever. That's nice and solid now, so that certainly served well, changing out that bearing and seal. So what we are going to do next, which will be pretty much the end of the video, because you don't need to see me put everything back together, since I've already supplied you with how to take everything apart, and also what the torque specifications are on each bolt. So we're gonna one-handedly take out our new one-way bearing. You're gonna see on one side it's gonna have a dot, and it will have an arrow if this camera will focus, and it will have the word outside on it. So outside means outside of your engine. So if I remove the clutch cover I had covering up this wet clutch here, I'm just going to set that down here somewhere clean. We're just going to take our rag, make sure it's nice and clean along here. This is where the one-way bearing sits on your wet clutch. We are once again make sure our dot and the writings that says outside is actually facing the outside. And because these cams are a little bit lobed, you're going to need to just wiggle that back and forth just like that. There. That is the replacement of a one-way clutch bearing on a Rhino 700. So, if you watch the video, I have annotated where everything is, what the torque specs on the bolts are, the important ones. Bolts like this that hold the seat on, you can pretty much crank those down to 2 ugga-duggas and be good. But I will, if I can find it in the manual, put the correct specifications on there. So hopefully this was a good guideline for anybody just digging into a Rhino with the purpose of replacing that one-way clutch bearing, or working on your primary clutch, or accessing your wet clutch, or accessing the oil seal around your clutch. Don't forget, there is a new gasket that goes along here as well. Don't forget to order that. So hopefully that's answered your questions. If you check the description below, I'll see if I can throw up some part numbers. But the easiest thing to do to get a nice exploded view diagram is go to, I think I use Babbitt's Online or Yamaha Parts House, I think it's called now, .com, and when you're searching for parts, you're actually seeing an exploded view of all the parts and components that you're going to be replacing, including the proper part numbers. So the part numbers on YamahaPartsHouse.com do match up with Yamaha OEM part numbers at your local dealer. So